Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for joining me. Today we're taking a look at a Prinz Criuiser radio cassette personal stereo, likely from the early 1980s, made in Japan. And it's a little bit of a follow-up, I guess, from last week where we looked at the Leuchtron personal stereo. And I was sorting out my kit here at Retro Resto's Vintage Electronics and came across this Prinz Criuiser, as I say. And to all intents and purposes, it almost looks like a mirror image of the Leuchtron that we featured last week. Made in Japan and very similar layout, very similar style, but it kind of looked like it might have one or two more features, and I thought it'd be worth just taking a look at it today because on closer inspection, whilst the radio works, it does have a slightly dodgy headphone socket, so that needs to be resoldered. And more importantly, when we press any of the transport controls, the motor can be heard running, but the belts are not doing anything, so they must need replacing today. Anyway, just a quick video, just thought we'd take a quick look at this Criuiser 6 from Prinz. So first order of service then, get the batteries out, start removing the visible screws. I do love items of this period where you could just undo the screws and there were no nasty fatigued plastic clips to snap or anything like that. So just gently persevere with this, and as always make sure that you remember where the screws came from because they can and often are different lengths, and of course some screw into plastic and some may screw into the circuit board, for example, so you may have machine screws or plastic screws and things like that. So anyway, onwards with the disassembly. So here's our first look inside then, and it's very typical of late 70s and early 80s electronic work. So first thing we need to do is ascertain if there are any screws holding the board down, and indeed any cables that we may need to desolder to give us a bit more access to the underneath of the board. Interestingly, quite often people will say, what does this bodge wire do, or what's that bodge wire for? And the phrase bodge wire has become sort of more used lately, I suppose, insofar as people use jumpers for broken traces or corroded elements or to bypass items and things like that. But back in the 70s and 80s, these weren't bodge wires. These were very much the intentional part of running cables from A to B. And of course, in the early onset of all of these electronics, there were less ICs and everything had to be kind of point-to-point hand wired. And it transpires that there are a few wires that will need to be desoldered. So time to heat up the iron and get those away. And there we go, just a few wires desoldered there. As long as you're careful and don't strain anything, you don't need to desolder everything. On the other hand, it is definitely usually worth desoldering some of the cables just to give you an easier life once you get inside, so you're not risking damage anything, and we've also got good access. So time to take a bit of a look at this mech then. Now we can see it trying to work, as you can tell there, and just by running the motor you can see that the belts have obviously seen better days. This is the auto stop belt. You may have noticed from the front cover of the Walkman that this did say auto stop on the cassette door, and yep, this one hasn't been used obviously in decades, looking at the state of it, so we'll replace that. Also just gently remove the second belt as well. And I have to be careful with this because it's a bit like a lot of the motors in the early ones, like the TPS-L2 and things like that, had the motor laid out sideways. So just make sure that the belt and the pulleys all go in the right way. Otherwise you end up with the belt running the wrong direction and things like that. So just take photos if in doubt and go from there. And here's a quick look at the inside for any geeks out there, just to show that even though it's a fairly easy unit to work on, it does still create a fair bit of mess. So just make sure we keep everything organised. Now this should have been hopefully quite an easy thing to do, but it transpires that to get the belt on and off we have to remove the flywheel backing plate, and unfortunately the screw to remove that is actually hidden by the stop mechanism, so we've got to now actually get that away before we can access the screw to remove the belt from the flywheel. And with the circlips and associated paraphernalia away, we can remove the stop mechanism to give us access to the screw. Unfortunately, this was of course sealed at factory 50 years ago with lacquer to prevent loosening, so we've got to soak that with some acetone first. If you didn't do this and just tried to force the screw, you'd be in a very grave danger of rounding the screw head out, and then you've got absolutely no chance. You'd have to drill the whole thing out and probably render the whole unit useless for the sake of one screw. So do take your time and be methodical with things like this. But once this screw is removed, we can get the backing plate away, and just like that, there it is. So not much else to do, we're nearly there now. Just time to remove the main drive belt and reinstall the new one. I've been very lucky on this occasion because the belt hasn't degraded to the point where it's kind of melted or dissolved into the pulleys. So just going to take our time here. Again, an extra few seconds will save us some grief later. If we can get this off in one piece, it would really help. Obviously the belt is way past the point of being useful to us from the point of view of sizing a new one, but at least if we can actually get it off in one piece, that saves us an awful lot of clearing up later. And because this was from an axial motor, look, we've got three-dimensional fixed in space there, almost like an infinity sign. Unusual for a belt to be that squiffy and out of shape and still be intact, but I'll take it. That motor sounds dreadful, so I'm going to flood it with some light oil and run it up for a while. And we'll just have a quick listen now of the before and after, see if it's made a difference. Definitely a marked improvement, a lot smoother. I'll leave it running for a little while longer and we'll get the belts on. We can now clean the capstan and give it a gentle drop of oil. Also clean the pulleys, use whatever you need, soft scraping tools, alcohol, baby wipes, whatever. Just make sure the oil and greases are away from the belt path. So on with the new belts then, and first we'll do the auto stop, and nice and simple. Just pop that one in there like so. Yep, feels good. And that's that one done. So the slightly more awkward one is the main drive belt. Of course, that's got to go over the main flywheel, the idler and the motor. Again, just remembering and referring back to any photos if you need to make sure that the pulley is actually going the right way. Otherwise, you'll probably end up with the belt running backwards. But anyway, simple as that. That's on and it should be good to go. Nice. So there it is then, the Prinz Criuiser 6 radio cassette player, all the way from the very early 1980s. Running nicely now on new belts. So just a quick show and tell, just a curiosity stroke reference video, and maybe even of use to anyone out there that maybe still has one of these and wants to get it up and running again. Either way, there it is, a quick show and tell, as I say. So thanks very much indeed for your company. I'll be back soon. Please remember to subscribe and like and hit the bell and all that kind of stuff. Help us share the channel, that'd be much appreciated. It doesn't cost anything, but would really help the channel for sure. So thanks again for watching. I'll be back soon. All the best for now. Bye bye.